Well, thanks for having me on, and thanks, Brett, for joining. I know you offer a lot of great questions that I will not have thought of. Tonight, I think that the main point of tonight is to kind of cover how COVID-19 has impacted recruiting overall. And I have to thank all the college coaches I've spoke to over the last several days. Let's talk to coaches in the Big Ten, the Big 12, the SEC, which is also part of the Big 12, the Pac-12, and the Ivy Leagues, of course, and as well as the ACC. So to all the coaches that have been willing to reach out and talk about how COVID-19 has impacted your process, thank you. It's been really informative, and I'm thankful to be here to be able to share it with both the high school rowers who are trying to find solutions and their parents, and then also the coaches that are really engaged in the process of how do you keep these athletes motivated and how do you support them during this really tough process that exists without a pandemic. And now we have the pandemic to sort of add into this challenge for high school coaches and athletes. So thanks for everybody for joining tonight. To sort of kick off is to really start with a general overview. And the point of the general overview here is let's talk about recruiting in general, right? And let's talk about what do they want regardless of the pandemic. And coaches want to know what the story is of the student athlete, right? They want to know, what is your background? How did you get to where you are? Why do you love the sport of rowing? And those things have never changed pre-pandemic or during a pandemic. Those are really important things to share in the recruiting process. And that remains relevant, if not more so, which we'll get to. And, coaches are looking for self-driven and self-disciplined athletes. That point speaks to itself. At the same time, this is an opportunity to shine on that just as you did before. So these bullet points are more about general recruiting guidelines and how coaches go about the recruiting process and what they're looking for. Yes, there's other metrics we'll talk about that are not going to be around for the next sort of 3 to 6 months. But in a general overview, they want to hear, how did you get to where you are? Why do you love what you're doing? And how are you planning to bring that same passion and joy for rowing to their university, which you should be extremely interested in? And that really is the meat of what recruitment's about. And I think that you'll hear through this that there's a lot of opportunity for all of the athletes to engage in this process right now. So looking at the next slide in COVID-19's impact specifically is this idea that, I think that more athletes have opportunities to be recruited, and that may sound counterintuitive. But with the historical criteria impacted, such as spring racing, the ability to separate 2Ks based on your team's training, your team's capacity to train. And even, we'll see what happens with the summer and touch on that a little bit. But there's less separation in some senses, and it gives more athletes an opportunity to really put in the work on their own and showcase their skills. And all of this is going to modify what is expected of the athlete and what the athlete can produce. At the same time, there's opportunities there. Like I said, I want to keep coming back to that point that every athlete should feel like they have an opportunity, and there's tons of ways to engage in the process. And the coaches are aware, right? I mean, I think that's one of the big points, is that coaches are aware of the shifting metrics and how are they going to handle them? They don't have answers. I think a lot of that is going to take more than 1 month, and that's kind of where we are at this stage. We're about 1 month into this, and where do we go? And then relationships, have greater importance, right? You can't simply get by on your 2K score. It's not as if, okay, I pulled a great 2K, it's regardless of who I am or what my journey is. Now you have to go out and you have to talk to these coaches, and you have to want to build that relationship and try to distinguish yourself from everyone else. And one of the points I heard over and over, and I will start talking specifically about what I heard from coaches, was this idea of, where was the athlete when they were stalled, right? And so understanding, early March, where were you in the process? Which boat were you in? Where was your 2K at the time? Where were other testing numbers at that time? And trying to understand how you got there, going back to that journey and saying, what was the improvement over that period of time? And how did you end up there? And they want to use that really as like a point in time. Here is when the pandemic shut down my rowing program, and now what am I doing, right? And you'll hear that. So that's a really important thing that I heard from several coaches. And then they want to know about taking control of your situation, right? So a lot of what I'll talk about tonight is this idea of I talk to all these coaches, and there's a wide spectrum, right, of beliefs, but there's commonality in a lot of the things they're saying, and then we'll cover some of the things that they may disagree on. But this idea that you can't take control of it, you can, you have this opportunity, and I think that they believe in you. They believe in the high school athletes, right? I sort of am directly talking to the high school athletes primarily, and you just have to sort of, how do I move forward, right? It is what it is, and we are all trying to adjust and get comfortable with it. And how do you find ways to improve and maintain? And we'll touch on that a little bit. But coaches are also interested in your ideas, and that's part of the things that we'll talk about. And so moving on, and is this, what is a college coach's perspective, right? And that is, they don't know what normal is. Like, their staffs are now taken apart. For years, since they were a high school rower, these coaches, they've been in a spring sport every year, right? They've probably coached a sport or rowed in rowing every year since they were in high school, and they're trying to find a normal as well, and they're trying to limit a change to their recruiting process because of the upheaval of their own program, and then understanding the change of COVID-19 to the high school athletes. It's really extensive, and they're hearing that in the phone calls, and they respect that. Every athlete's going through something different. And it is adjusting timelines and deadlines. At the same time, with only 1 month in, we don't really have clarity on what those changes are. They are still curious about what's going to happen with summer camps, just as you are. They're curious about what's going to present itself for the fall. Will there be students on campus, right? And by and large, I would say a majority of people think that there will be. But these timelines and deadlines, they're fluid. And they are trying to minimize the impact and then decide how are they going to recruit this class of athletes with new deadlines and timelines. Some of it could potentially moved up, and some of it be delayed. And I think there's various reasons for both. And hopefully we'll touch on those through here as we get into a little bit more in depth about what the coaches are saying. But coaches also are saying they have more time. They have a lot more time to do the due diligence on the rower, to reach out to high school coaches, or to just talk to the athlete and have more meaningful conversations. And that's what you're seeing. Hopefully, those of you that are engaging in the process is these coaches have so much more time on their hands that they want to engage in this process, because they're going a little bit crazy with nothing to do and no boat to coach and no jokes to be had down on the water. So engaging with high school rowers to talk about the sport is what they do every day. They want to talk about that sport, and they want to talk about your potential success at their university. And so engage in that. And, I spoke to one coach, and really a great way to frame it was, given the nature of the situation, there's two sides to this. Like, coaches are asking recruits, like, what more information do you need about their program, right? Just as they're going to ask for more information about you in this process that has stalled for making decisions, particularly on the women's side. What more information do you need in order to make a really informed decision? And this is a good opportunity to sort of sort that out and say, okay, what information should I gather? What are the questions I need to ask for me to come to a decision that this is the place I want to be, and this is the place I want to go? And so the coaches are being proactive in saying, what else do you need from us? How can we help you in this process? And I think that's another way where these collegiate coaches are really going out of the way to try to support the process of the high school student athlete going through this, right? I think they want to know, how do we help you get to where you are comfortable with this program and this school, in this environment? And that may not always come out straightforward from the coach, but ultimately they want to have that conversation with you. So going on to communication, and I touched on this. Every coach I spoke to, every one of them just talked about what is the meaningfulness of the conversation now versus before, and the capacity to engage, because you don't have to worry about your lineup, your boat rigging, the away regatta you've got to prep for, even the academic piece. I mean, college coaches have so many balls to juggle, from what are the kids going to class and what are the grades they're getting? Are they meeting with their wellness instructors on a monthly basis to talk about wellness as a collegiate athlete and the pressures that come from that? And so without a lot of these tasks that just can't be done, they're having more meaningful conversations, and they want to engage in that with you. And I think that that is really, really important. And, you know, I think the other thing I heard from all of them is they want to know, what is life like now for you with COVID-19's impact, right? They want to know, how has it impacted you personally, not just your erg, not just as a rower, but how are you handling it at home? How is mom and dad handling it? Or grandma and grandpa, are they struggling? They really are looking for that information. Part of it is the relationship, but they also want to be an outlet there so that you can have a conversation with them and talk about this impact and understand. And they're talking to so many recruits. Some of these coaches are talking to 20, 30 recruits per week. And when you're talking to that many recruits, they're able to tell stories about, oh, I just talked to someone and they're going through something similar, and this is how they're managing it. So I think the college coaches are a wealth of information as far as they're able to talk to so many athletes weekly that they have a lot of knowledge about how most of these high school athletes are handling it, and they want to hear more. They want to know what those stories are. And so, you know, these bullet points are really pretty self-explanatory, but I want to hammer it home how important they are, because I heard them from multiple coaches, right? We understand that the economy is, it's pretty interesting after today. It's going up and down nonstop, but there's definitely over 6 million people that have applied for unemployment, and people are getting furloughed and let go. And those are going to have an impact on the recruiting process. They're going to have an impact on the school decisions, right? I spoke to a couple, I'd say 2 or 3 coaches where athletes have already had to change their decisions because of some of the impacts of these financial market changes and job status. So I think that's coaches are prepared to have that conversation, right? And I will highlight that again later. Coaches are ready to have these difficult conversations because they've done a lot of them before, maybe not in a pandemic. At the same time, they're well prepared to sort of engage and, talk about what is the stress, what's happening in your life, and really get to know who you are and how they can support you. I mean, part of it, and a couple coaches really emphasize this, it's about the fit, right? Like when you look at the athlete to the university, it's so dependent on the fit. And that fit is part of that conversation and that relationship, and being able to trust the coach, and the coach should be able to give really good advice on what's happening right now. And then, I think the one thing that most of them told me that I want to make clear is probably the last bullet point, is that you should not be afraid or worried about reaching out with very specific questions. I know a lot of people are curious about SAT standards. There's a number of schools that have now dropped that standard or allowing students to decide whether they want to use it or not. And every coach is basically saying, email the coach, ask the specific question you want about that university's academic changes, testing impacts, and updates to their timeline. It would be impossible for me to cover the gamut in one webinar on how every league is handling it different, or every coach is handling it different, and within the universities. I mean, the conversations that you're hearing about what's going to happen in the athletic department with various sports and when they pick up, you're having some coaches in this country that are very much in the know. I mean, to the point of athletic departments are talking about scheduling and moving things around and moving sports. And then you have other coaches that just don't have the information. Their athletic department's not sharing it with them, or their athletic department doesn't have it. So I think that there is no one answer, one size fits all. Here's what's happened. Here's how the timelines changed. Here's how the academic standards have changed. You've got to do your homework and say, okay, what are the testing standards for that university in the fall? And understand, and that will become part of your selection potentially, right? I mean, unfortunately, all the testing's on hold, but I think you'll see more and more schools that will go away from requiring a standardized test. I just don't think you'll see a lot of that. I think more and more people will move away from it just because it levels the playing field back out for all the applicants. But it's one of those things we'll have to watch, see what happens, and every program will have their own answer. And programs are ready to do that. I can't stress enough. These coaches are ready to answer your questions about, and they're not going to be vague. They want to be direct, because ultimately they want transparency in their process, because it saves them time and it allows them to focus on the relationship. There's really nothing to hide for them in this regard. All right.
Before we move on, a couple of questions for you.
Yeah.
Is there an easy way to tell if a coach is seriously interested in you? I mean, you speak about being direct. you know, is will you get it? Will the kids get a direct answer if they're not interested in them, or will the coaches be polite? You know, is it okay for an athlete to ask directly if there's a chance? Like, you know, should they? I don't want to say wasting each other's time, but can you be that direct?
I think I would put it in three areas, right? I would say one area is we're interested because you do have an erg score that we know is tried and true, and we know it's good enough to be here, and we're interested in it. And that's the easy one. The other one is on the other end of the spectrum, which is here's our erg standard to kind of start the conversation or where we want to recruit from, right? And you're far off of that at this point, right? Let's say the standard is, I don't know, let's say it's 550 just for fun, and you're at a 645, that's too far off, right? And so you have those two extremes. And I think coaches are more than willing to say where you fall is whether we're interested or uninterested. I think the next area is really great, Chris. And it's challenging because you want these kids to see progress. And in the middle of this, you do see so much progress from the athletes from this March to next September is growth. So if you're within their frame of reference of what they're looking for as an athlete with the grades, the test scores that were existing but are no longer, the height, the build overall, and the 2K score, then they're going to have a conversation with you. And I'm not stressing only the 2K score. I'm saying it puts you in a range. And it could be another test. It could be a 6K. It could be a 30-minute test. It could be a 5K. It could be a 4K. I think that what you'll find right now is the amount of free time that coaches have is that if they're engaging in the conversation in you, they're interested in you. And I think that's a really fair way. Now, a lot of recruits always say, well, I don't get an email reply. I don't get an email reply. Well, I think a lot of it is based on, did you leave it? Did you send an email with open-ended questions? Did you say you were going to send updates? Have you followed through on what you said you were going to do? And I think those are really valuable. Did you say, hey, I'll email you after I take my next test or after I do my workout, and then they didn't hear from you for 2 weeks, right? And maybe you got sick or tired or couldn't do it or injured, but that's still part of that process of being held accountable to saying, hey, I wanted to do this. I wanted to tell you I was doing it, and then following through. So there's no great answer there, but I don't think that coaches are going to spend a lot of time with recruits that they're not interested in. And at the same time, the recruits that are trying to get noticed, which we'll get to, you just have to keep knocking on the door and saying, you want me, and this is why, and you want me, and this is why. And if you're willing to do that from a realistic perspective, as in a school is saying, these are our parameters, this is what we're looking for, and if you can fit within these parameters, we're interested in you, and you're saying, I'm going to get there, I'm going to get there, I'm going to be there, great, they're willing to listen. And so I don't, that's where I think there's more opportunity right now, because they're willing to have more conversations because they don't know what you're going to do over the next 6 months. These coaches have no idea what's going to change in the next 6 months for each one of these athletes. And so they want to reach out, build a relationship, and have, it's not a risk for these coaches, but in a sense of like, invest the time, and time is valuable, right? We never get our time back. And when we lose it, we lose it. But they want to invest the time and see how you're going to develop. So that's a long-winded answer. I know it's not concrete, but I still think a lot of it comes down to how much do you want to show your perseverance, and how much, if the coach is engaging in a conversation with you, you must have shared something meaningful. You must have talked about something and followed through. You must be doing some of the things the right way. And if not, try to find a better way, or kindly, this would be my last thing. I would say, ask that coach at that program, what standards are you looking for? And they will tell you, they will always tell you, I am looking for 6 foot. I'm looking for 5'4". I'm looking for 7'42". I'm looking for 6'31", whatever it may be. They were happy to share those and have that knowledge out there. And I can go further and further down this wormhole. We can go on to the next one.
Yeah, you mind if I just throw another question or two past you?
Fire away.
Same question before, I mean, but in terms of coxswains.
Oh.
We get a lot of questions about coxswains and where do they fit in and what should they be asking. It's not, I mean, there's not as many definitive numbers, right? So what can a coxswain be doing, and what can they be asking?
I think the first thing is to acknowledge that the coxswain recruiting process is by far and away the hardest, probably of any recruitment of any sport, of any position. I mean, it is the least measurable possible position, yet it's extremely vital. And there just are far more limited spots. And I think that's a really hard reality, is that it's very hard to get recruited, and it's very hard to get a spot, and primarily that's just due to numbers, right? And longevity. I mean, coxswains aren't going to suffer as many, potential injuries. A lot of the workload is different for them at a collegiate level because of recovery time and this, that, and the other. So the process is hard. And I think that coxswain recordings can be helpful. I know a lot of people want to know that, but I would make sure you know what you're sending. And I would think that you want to make sure that it is of your best point of time. And it doesn't even, it can be a full 2K, it can be 2 minutes. A lot of that is making sure that you're sharing something that you value and you think that you did a really great job on. And I think the other part of coxswain is what are you doing now with your teams? Like now that your teams are in isolation essentially, or most places are, especially when you're talking, New York and California contingent and New Jersey, what are you doing to help your current team? Are you scheduling the Zoom calls? Are you scheduling these sessions? Are you finding a way to partake in it? And sharing that story. And that's what one of the slides is later, is like, how do you share that story? And, what boat you're in is really important. And I think what boat were you in right at the stall of the season because of the pandemic will play a role. At the same time, I think what might happen is some coaches will wait to see what happens in the fall and wait. A lot of times coaches will wait and say, okay, what boat are they in the fall? And when you look at the number, what is there? There's how many high school programs are there, Chris? Like 1,000?
There are 1,400 give or take programs in the country, of which the vast majority are high school oriented clubs, high school teams.
Yeah. So let's say there's 800 high school programs, right? And that means there's, at least 600 varsity 8 coxswains out there. And that's a pretty substantial number when that's not going to get there. So I think that one of the challenges these coxswains have is how do I try to be in the top boat and position myself to get recruited? And then, what am I doing within that team and sharing my story about how engaged I am in the process of developing myself and developing the team. I think that it's really going to be that relationship building through the spring. And how do I guess my thing is, I don't know, doing all the extra stuff that's available out there for you isn't going to necessarily put you over the hump. I think building a strong relationship will help you. I think the clinics and the opportunities to talk to experts and watching the webinars, that should be able to help you talk about the sport of rowing better. And I think that's really the distinguishing factor, is that how you talk about the sport as a coxswain is really vital, because you generally only have a couple perspectives. And as a rower, that perspective is really the same, right? When you row sweep, you have 2 hands on one blade. Generally, the outside hand shouldn't be feathered, right? For a coxswain, from one city to another, the differences in those programs and the drills that are run, the style of workouts is vastly different. So when you engage in other opportunities to learn more about coxswain through camps, clinics, conversations, tutoring, it's about expanding your knowledge of the sport overall so that you can engage in that conversation with coaches about why you love it more and more and how you're going to make an impact on your team.
Can I interject something, Chris?
Sure.
Is that right? And I think Patrick is, like, you're alluding to this completely, but I can't be explicit enough. And just for everyone's reference, I'm Brett Gorman and I run our U23 teams for US rowing. But previous to that, I was a college recruiting coach for 10 years. So I do have some experience similar to Patrick. And I can't stress enough how important phone calls versus emails are. And that when you ask the question, Chris, you said the question was, what's like the clearest way to know if a coach is interested? I think it's easy for things to be a little bit less clear over email. And, that asking the question about the standards, what are the standards to be, are you interested? Like, what are your standards and what would I need to do to be on your recruiting list, and how many recruits are you able to have? And I think for coxswains, that's triply important. And you can do Zoom calls, you can do video chats. Anytime I was recruiting a coxswain, usually they came to campus, which obviously right now is not an option. So if I were still coaching college, I would be doing the Zoom calls, and how much that is important with email, but really way more important than email to do that over the phone.
One question and 2 thoughts. Number one, coxswains. There are 5 coxswain talks coming up between now and the end of this month. So there's going to be plenty of stuff for Coxsons to sink their teeth into. Number two, I don't want to bog down Patrick with a lot of questions right now, so we're going to ask one more. I am sure there will be loads of questions by the end of this talk, but the talk will never end if we keep stopping them. So what we'll do is, if we get to a point where we can't answer all of your questions tonight, we will endeavor to get all those questions answered and send them out in like an Excel form with all their answers to you by the end of the week or the end of the weekend. Okay, so don't fret if we don't get your question tonight. It's not that it wasn't important. And then, Patrick, I have one question, then we're going to definitely move on. The NCAA recently extended spring athletes an additional season of eligibility. Do you expect that this will lower the number of athletes that are recruited?
No and yes.
Oh, that was great. Okay. No confusion there.
I mean, so Brett said no. In talking to coaches, I think the amount that it changes is negligible. Let me put it that way. That's the first thing I would say. The amount that it changes is negligible. I think that the way that coaches are viewing it, though, that we really have to respect is this. A lot of athletes missed out on a season this spring, especially the seniors and those juniors. And so giving them the opportunity to compete for the 4 years that they wanted to compete has got to be the priority for that program. And it speaks so much to the coaches that want to invest the time and the energy into those athletes to let them to continue to compete. So I think that the impact of that rule will have little effect. If I were to give you a really honest answer, I think the economy is going to have a bigger effect. And I know I'm going into like crazy adult world here, but the point is that why would a student leave college? If there are no jobs and if the market does go down and the job rate stays low, what you're going to see is back in 2008, 2009, when you just have more and more athletes that want to stay in school and get masters. But I don't think you're necessarily going to see this massive amount of people that just want to stay in school. I think they're going to want to stay in school because they really have put in the time and energy, and it gives them a greater opportunity. I think when you look at the class of 2021, a lot of those decisions probably already needed to be made about staying in school. And so trying to navigate those waters right now are happening in that program. So overall, yes, there could be slightly smaller numbers, but we're talking 1%, 2%. We're not talking large percentages. And those are really because those are given that more athletes are staying. I will say this, there are more slots overall than there are athletes that are ready to fill them. And that's where you see programs engaging in the walk-in process across this country to allow kids that have never rowed before, that are freshmen in college, to come into campus. So if you can prove you belong on that squad and you take money out of the equation, I will be clear in that, you take money out of the equation, you prove you belong on that squad, you'll get a spot. And I don't think that will change.
And I think, Alex here just pointed in the chat that the Ivy League, they don't have the option. You can't stay for an additional year. They're not going to be abiding by that NCAA regulation, and because they don't allow grad student athletes to compete. And I've heard from multiple college coaches too, and everybody's handling it differently. But I think Patrick's 100% right with that. There might be a small difference, but it's going to be negligible.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And the Ivy, yeah, I mean, the Ivy Leagues are saying this year seniors can't come back, right?
Yes.
And so, and if they have a timeline on how long it takes you to graduate, that is what it is. And mm-hmm. It just will be so small. It'll be small.
Good questions though, guys. Great questions.
Are we going to 2Ks?
Do it.
All right. The big
muted. Yeah, let's get it.
This is what everybody wants to know. So, again, partly my opinion, but it's the opinion I continue to toss out there is I think without 2Ks happening this spring and this summer, from a team standpoint, there's going to be less separation in those 2K scores. I have other coaches that tell me the complete opposite. And what I mean by that is your 2K score, so many of you are traditionally training with your teams and you make this leap your junior year because partly of recruiting pressure, partly because of engagement in the sport, and part of it is just physiology. You're getting bigger, stronger, and faster. So that's happening. I think in some ways, though, that without that taking place, there are less opportunities for separation. And one of the coaches I spoke to sort of talked about that, of how hard it is to test the 2K on your own and how there's opportunities to take other tests and use other metrics, right? At the same time, keep in mind that some coaches do believe that if you're that kid that's really diligent and working hard and putting in the hours, you still have tons of opportunity to separate yourself. And this goes back to me saying there's opportunity out there for everyone, is that they understand that the 2K score is no longer the primary driver in the sense of that is it. It's not whatever weight it was, cut it in half. They still want to know what the score is, but they want to know, what are you doing now? How are you making changes to improve your scores, your athletic fitness? How are you engaging in being a better athlete? So you can take some of the 2K pressure off the table. At the same time, part of that is engaging with the coaches and understanding what they're looking for. But I think that you are going to see, it's not that programs are going to relax the 2K standard. I don't think that's the case. I think coaches are going to evaluate on a case-by-case basis and understand where you were and how you got there. And I don't know where I have it in this slide, but there's a lot of people that are maybe, you know, in their first year of rowing and they're having a really good steep learning curve and they didn't get there, or there's another athlete that was ready to make a leap. And they know those things, and that's part of the conversation and part of what I recommend later on as far as talking. So as I said, it doesn't carry as much weight. And then, like I said as well, there's other tests. There's a 30-minute test that's at 20 to 22, which is pretty standard across the sport of rowing. It's not done as much at the high school level, but it's still pretty standard. And you have the 4K, 5K, 6K. And then, you know, if you talk to, I don't know, any one of these coaches, they probably have some workout they know, right? Whether it be 2x20, 2x4K, 3x5K, and they know what those numbers mean. So I think there's an opportunity there to do it. And I think that I touched a bit on the class of 2022, and those guys have tons of time. I would not stress. I understand the juniors are stressed going into their senior year here and trying to understand the 2K world. I think for the sophomores moving into junior year that get to start to have a conversation June 15th if you're a female rower, and it's either, I think it's August or July 1st for the male rowers, or September, somewhere in there. It's changing, I feel like. But so when that conversation starts, these coaches will be very understanding. So I think for the junior class, this slide pertains more to you. If I was in the freshman or sophomore class, I wouldn't worry that much about the 2K score. I think there's plenty of time to get it to where it needs to be. I don't think that's the stress you need in life right now. Just enjoy training, enjoy getting fit, get ready to get back in the water when that time happens. And to the juniors, they're going to unweight it a little bit for you and try to understand your journey. He's moved me on to the next one. How to stand out. So this is, let me read through it really quick. So I think this is the thing is, this was a really great conversation I had, is like, share your interest in the program. Like if this is where you want to go. And I think what we always see as recruiters when we're in that role is we get so much planned and prepared answers, and we get so much cookie cutter stuff, and we're not getting genuine interest. We're getting what you think that we want to hear. And as coaches, it can be sussed out pretty quickly. We've heard a lot over the years that we've been in the recruiting business. So I think that these coaches really want you to stand out and say, this is why I want to come here. This is what I want to do here. And that is going to be a big deal, because they're looking for athletes that are driven and want to be a part of their program and their culture. I understand how hard it is to learn about their culture right now. I recommended to some other people earlier this week, get on Instagram. Get on their website, read recent news articles, look at their roster, try to learn about the program, not just the school, and see if it's a good fit for you, right? I mean, how does that head coach sort of talk about their athletes after the race? You know, who's communicating, and, you know, who are you talking to in the recruiting process? What are they posting? Is it something that I want to be a part of? Are those posts, does it look fun? Those things do matter, and that's why they're doing it, because they know it matters. So I think that you have the opportunity there to show that you're interested in the program, and it's going to go a long way, and they're going to know when it's genuine or not. They just are. And that's going to be really a big differentiator factor for schools, because when you have to pick across 5 athletes, you want the one that wants you the most. And that's a really big deal. I think the other thing is, when you're communicating, whether it be a phone call or an email, share how you're having fun and share how you're working hard. And those two things will help you stand out, right? And again, I'm talking directly at the high school athlete, so instead of general, but this idea that if the high school athlete can say, this is what I'm doing and I'm having fun, I promise you, not everyone's doing that. A lot of people are thinking it's not that important, or they're not being consistent, and it can't be a one-off thing. So if you're that one that's finding a way to have fun, finding a way to be creative, finding a way to engage in the process, these coaches are going to take notice. And it's really a way for you to stand out, for sure. And then I heard this from one of the coaches, and I just loved when she used this term. And she said, be entrepreneurial. And I just thought that was such a great way to think about it, right? Is you know, find ways to maintain and improve your fitness and find it as creative as possible. You know, I saw somebody the other day, they're doing 30 burpees every day, right? Figure out what you're going to do that distinguishes you, that shows I'm committed to this sport because I want to be fit for the moment I'm allowed back on the water. And so this idea of being an entrepreneur is really great, and reporting back on that. Like what is your creative spirit? What have you done? And how are you handling the adversity, right? What are you doing that's fun? Even if you're doing something silly, I still think that's part of it, of ways to really distinguish yourself, because that shows what type of teammate you're going to be. I mean, that's so important to these coaches. Like, I'm going to bring this high school kid in and they're going to come in and row. How are they going to affect my culture? And how are they going to contribute? And if you're one of these creative, entrepreneur, hardworking people, sign me up, right? That's what they're all thinking. Sign me up. I want that kid. So I think tons of opportunity there. And I think those are the key ways to stand out. I think that there's probably no wrong way, as long as it's focused around, you know, building your team, whether it be, maybe you're the one organizing Zoom calls, maybe you're organizing, I don't know, a push-up challenge with your teammates, or, you know, whatever it is. Maybe you're doing group runs and everybody's wearing, you know, headphones with their phone and talking, right? Like, how cool would that be? You know, those types of things. Keep finding ways. You're more creative than I am. You'll figure this out. I have faith. So that's how to stand out, I think. And so the timeline part, I touched on this a little bit, and I just wanted to sort of just reiterate, like, this idea of like short term, and then the next slide is long term. And, you know, what I was saying is that, you know, these coaches have more free time. They're willing to build stronger relationships with athletes and get to know them better. And if you were to take another silver lining out of this, I think when this class of 2021 enrolls in college, that relationship is going to be amazingly strong. The culture of that class is going to be strong. And I think coaches are going to make really great decisions about great athletes. And it's really just, it's going to help this whole thing rebound and come back strong. I mean, next year is going to be a hard year on everyone. And then all of a sudden that class of 2021, when you guys come in, if you're one of those athletes, and to the coaches and parents supporting them, it's going to be an awesome opportunity. And then, you know, I sort of talked about the stress, and I think that, how do I phrase this? It was interesting that some coaches felt like athletes have more time, right? High school athletes now have more time to train. I think that some of these coaches don't necessarily all have children that are in school right now, and understanding how much of a challenge it is to get the kid to sit there and do his homework all day, if that's what he has, or sit on a call. But overall, I do think most of us think that there's more time, and most of us, I wouldn't lump me in here, I would say most coaches think that there's more time that could be spent on working out in the short term. And that's really hard. I know the big question is, well, how do I work out? But they think that there's time to do it. So again, those of you that want to engage in the process, or those coaches on this webinar, I would encourage you to build out training plans and give athletes workouts, right? Because one of the big things is, you know, I'm not even sure I have it longer down in this talk, but this idea of sharing a training plan with the college coach is really important. So for the high school coaches, giving the athletes a training plan, that high school athlete sharing it with the college coach, and then the high school athlete executing it in this short-term frame is really valuable, because it shows that high school athletes really putting in the time. And so, you know, and hopefully that free time can be used to sort of do that. And then, you know, again, athletes have more time to train and make improvements. I heard that across the board, but I think a lot of coaches don't necessarily understand some of the challenges happening at home with school. But I also believe that there are some athletes that have the opportunity, assuming they have an org. Did we ever do that poll? We never did the poll. I thought it'd be great to do a poll. I mentioned to Cam about who has an erg. And then, we're only 1 month in. And I think a big question is like, what is the staying power of the athletes and the teams? I think it's hard on the high school coaches. They have obligations and families and responsibilities, and some programs are running lean on funds, and that's changing the dynamic. And I think the individual athletes are also challenged a lot of ways, and we're only 1 month into this, and hopefully we can get out and get some fresh air a lot more often. But I think that in the short term, what is the staying power, and can you get through this? Because hopefully it is only short term. And then looking at long term, I think that I touch on this is like this idea of official visits. And I talked to both the male athletes and the female athletes. And, for the men, not much has changed. I think that the men don't necessarily have the spring results to sort of schedule official visits based on, what seat you were in or what race you raced or how you performed. But as far as the sport in general, there's most of those programs are all doing their official visits in the fall, in September, October, and November. And at this stage today, that is likely going to move forward at the same plan. Yes, there are scenarios, and schools are talking about what happens if you're not in class in the fall and you're still online, or what if fall classes start later, is what I heard from one school. But for now, the official visits across every coach I spoke to said, we're going to move forward as we always have. And for the men, that leaves everything the same. For the women, it changes because of the official visits that could have taken place in March, April, and May to get to know the programs, to see the coaches, and to see the team. Those are ultimately getting pushed back to the fall. So in some ways, that program gets slowed down a little bit. If you're a female rower and you're needing visits, then that opportunity to see that program slows down this recruiting process for you potentially. And it's a tricky world, because in many ways the process is moving faster because there's more time to have phone calls, there's more time to do emails for these coaches, and so they're able to build relationships stronger. Yet what you're going to see is stronger relationships waiting on these official visits if that's what the athlete needs in order to make the informed decision. Let me say this as well. Coaches understand if an athlete needs to take that official visit to make the final decision. There's a difference between taking the official visit because you have 10 schools you're looking at, and then taking the official visit because you have a couple schools you're looking at, assuming that this school is offering you an opportunity. So that's out there. And then we're all waiting to hear from the presidents and the chancellors, right? That's an obvious point that we sort of need to reiterate, that, as I said earlier, these coaches are coaches in an athletics department in an academic institution. They are all academic first institutions, and they are all athletic departments and teams second. And so those decisions will get to them when they can. And I guarantee you that when the coach hears, you'll hear, right? They're going to update you as quickly as they can, especially if it comes to official visits. They're going to make decisions. And I think families need to stay on top of what each school I'm interested in, what are their announcements, like whether it be Twitter, the website, whatever it may be, what are the announcements that are coming out of that school that impact my process, and being able to have that conversation. So maybe, I don't know, is there any questions about that at all? Did I miss anything, Brett or Chris?
Well, quick time check. It's quarter of, just so you know.
Yeah.
There are some questions, but I feel like let's get through with what let's keep the rhythm going, and we'll answer the questions after. All right.
All right. Showing coaches progress. So as I said, this was another great point that I heard from a few coaches, is that it's still measurable, right? Whether it be I did 6 pull-ups and now a month later I'm doing 12. That is, I used to run a mile. I used to run 3 miles at a 21-minute interval, and now I can run 3 miles at 19:30. Those are still ways to show that you're engaging and improving. And those are still measuring progress that you're making as an athlete. So pick what you want to do and find ways that it's going to be measured. But they're still interested in what are you doing to work out, and finding ways, whether it be creative or not, even still, of doing it. And update the coaches. Let me say it again. Update the coaches. They want to know what you're doing. Just because they didn't reply doesn't mean they didn't read it. You, as a high school athlete, a coach, a parent, we've all read emails all the time and haven't hit reply for days on days on days. And that's why Gmail now has a little nudge that says, hey, you haven't talked to this person. Do you want to reply to them? So update the coaches on what's happening, and tell them what your training plan is. So tell them what your goal is. Or if you're building your own training plan, share that. And as I said, show coaches progress. They can interpret every score, right? Most of them are still extremely athletic, and all of them rode, so they all understand what all these scores mean, whether it be running, cycling, rowing. We'll figure it out. And if not, we'll call a friend. I say we, but I just think in general, people that are involved in sports have the capacity to understand what various numbers mean and understand when you're showing progress. I think one big question is, how do I share my scores? I think screenshots are great. I think a lot of coaches, I think you have two different sides of coaches. You have some coaches that never want to ask because they think that means they don't trust you. And you have other coaches that are more than willing to ask for that screenshot. I think don't even make it an issue for the coach. Just share the screenshot. Just put it in an email, text it, whatever you're doing to communicate, share the screenshot. And if you're on a run, take a picture of your watch, take a picture of your phone, screenshot your phone and send that. There's so many ways to share that really valuable information about what you're doing, how you're working hard, and what's your progress. Technology is so advanced, you can find a way to do it probably better than the coach can.
Patrick, do you mind if I jump in just real quick?
Yes.
I would say that you may not want to share like every one of your runs or Monday through, you know what I mean? Like every day you're sending something to the coach. I mean, there's got to be some limits on how frequently you're sending. Like they don't want to see your screen every day, or do they?
I think that's a great question. It's more about how you format the information you're giving. I don't think a coach has any problem with seeing your workout every day. Just don't send me 5 screenshots without me having any idea what it is, right? And yeah, maybe update me once a week as opposed to every day if I was coaching, right? Like if I was the recruiter, okay. So I think that you can email coaches as many workouts as you want. Do you need to? No, that's not what I'm advocating. But I'm saying to overshare is probably better, right? It just shows your commitment to that team and this process that you're trying to get on. Make sure it's formatted correctly and they understand what they're looking at. It doesn't have to be formal. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be, okay, when I open that email as the recruiting coach, would I be able to understand what's happening, right? And that's the question. And so every coach, that's my short answer. Make sure.
And if you're texting, because I think a lot of kids will just text that screenshot, make sure you always put in that text who you are, because they might have saved your number from previous conversations, but maybe not. Like, hi coach, it's so-and-so from so-and-so. Here's my work. Like, include your name always.
And text and the workout.
Yes.
Name and workout. Even though you think the workout's obvious, it's not. Sometimes it's like, well, I'm not sure what happened here. And again, maybe you had guidelines on that workout, right? Like maybe somebody told you you're supposed to be at 22 when another coach thinks you should be at 28, right? It's like, well, no, my coach told me I should be doing, a 2K at 22, whatever. That wouldn't happen, but you get the point. And then I think that's it. I think that, I think this was another great point, and I touched on a little bit this idea that the cream can rise to the top right now, and this is where I come back to that main point of opportunity, is that there's going to be athletes that aren't interested in training, and they don't have the staying power to keep going. And coaches are going to have to be accommodating with that and understanding with that, to be honest with some of them. But at the same time, this is a place where you can really distinguish yourself. And if you're dedicated, you're working out weekly, you're sending updates weekly, and this goes on for 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks, holy moly, like that's the kid I want. And a really great thing that I didn't directly write it in here, but this idea that a college coach said to me, when you're in college, the biggest leaps you make are generally in the winter break and summer, when you're on your own. Because when you're in college, you're training with the team every day, and the difference in the increase in that ERG score is within a certain, standard deviation. But when you go get to train on your own, you have teammates that aren't training over the summer, and you're training, you have the opportunity to make a huge leap. And they're viewing this, for some of you, from that same lens of what an opportunity right now. There's going to be a lot of athletes that are not going to keep working out. And if you're the one that does, you're not only going to make a leap, but you're also these other people are going to fade, and you're going to show how valuable a high school rower is to that program. So that's the last point on that one. And then the closing sort of ones, and these are just kind of coming back to some big ones, are, you know, showing your progress. I think I've iterated that enough. That was the one thing I heard from every single coach. Show how you're working on it in a difficult situation with COVID-19. Everybody's aware of the challenges. You know, all of us are stuck in our houses, unfortunately, and they're ready to have a conversation. I think that implementing a training plan and showing the dedication commitment is a big deal. So if you can get the help of the high school coaches to say, can we build a training plan together so that I can share it with my recruiting coach and I can execute it? I think you'll see a lot of people say yes and want to engage in that process. And then the other thing is, you know, when you do that and you follow through, that's just good character, right? That's just really good character traits to build on that coaches want in their college program. And then sort of, the great Sam Baum, who we spoke to today, sort of walked through this one. I'll give him credit. Rowers like structure, right? And this idea of like pick a goal in the future, set a plan, share your updates on the path, and achieve the goal. And if you can just use those 4 bullet points for the next 1 month to 6 months, you will have nailed it, right? This idea of, you know, what is the goal going to be if it is running a half marathon, if it's running a 5K in a certain amount of time, if it's riding your bike 100 miles in one day. The point is, like, have something and a goal, an athletic goal that you're going to go for, set a plan on how you're going to get there, share the updates on the path, and then achieve it, and it's going to go a long way. Not all of that is extremely rowing specific, but for those of you that don't have an erg, that's a good way to engage in that process. And then stationary bikes, we haven't talked about much. I think rowers generally stick more to ergs than stationary bikes. I think if you're on the stationary bike, there's lots of opportunities there. There's apps that you can use. I know Swift's a big one. You can get on there and do some Swift rides, and generally coaches will understand, okay, he cycled for 90 minutes or 2 hours this week or 4 hours this week or 6 hours, and sharing that. So I think those are your 3 ways. I think there's tons of ways to work out beyond running, erging, and cycling, but those are the 3 obvious ones I think that rowers kind of hit, and I would stick with them. And then I think the last point is an interesting one, but I always say to recruits, I think it's really important as a non-recruiter and someone that's not actively recruiting athletes anymore. I think it is really important to consider backup schools and schools that maybe don't have rowing. And I know that sounds tough, but when you look at the percentages, you have to be prepared. And I think that is the other really important thing that any family I talk to would say, okay, what are your rowing schools? What are your non-rowing schools? Or what are your backups? Because nobody would ever want to put all their eggs in one basket. And I know that's not meant to be a letdown. It's just meant to be a reality of, you want to be making sure that you're in the right place for every high school athlete. So consider the backup schools for every high school athlete.
All right. You want to take a couple questions?
Sure, fire away.
All right, let's see what we got here. All right. How do you feel about the apps, the recruiting apps? There's several, and there's several options out there. How important are these versus just filling out questionnaires and building rapport with the coaches?
I think a lot of athletes have a ton of free time right now, so I don't know if I'd cut corners is my short answer. But I think that the recruiting apps are helpful when they're free, right? And I know that, you know, Be Recruited, NCSA, I think, is that how you pronounce it? Captain U all have a free plan. And, you know, those are primarily databases. And I think it's helpful for ways that you may not know, which is part of even the admission process, allowing other coaches to see what you've done. It helps just to sort of legitimize the fact that you are a rower. And that does actually help. So a lot of athletes are going to need to create them eventually. How much do coaches use it? Coaches use them, would I say, a lot? I would say coaches use them to identify prospects and engage in a conversation with you. Is it going to be that you build it and 40 schools are going to contact you? Well, given the number of programs, that's probably not what's going to happen. But if you get 5 coaches to reach out to you, you're probably going to be hitting the jackpot and feeling pretty good about it. And I think it gives a pathway. So the paid plans can be helpful. if you need them. And I think the paid plans are helpful for some very generic guidance. I think the paid plans offer pretty generic guidance as far as how to get recruited. Most of that stuff I think can be found online. But if you want to sort of get it quick and easy, sure. And then I think the other thing is it allows you to be more organized, because most of the paid apps allow you to have sort of an email account where you're able to email those coaches. So you may have the opportunity to email back and forth with the coach. Having said all this, the coach does not want to email you through Be Recruited, NCSA, or any other app. They really don't want to do it. So would I suggest you make a profile? Yes. I think it doesn't take that long. I think you should update it and make it valuable. At the same time, I think it is a tool. It is not a solution. It's a tool in your toolkit. And so there's that one. Was that the answer? Is there another?
Yeah, and it's also worth noting that Captain U is a sponsor of U.S. Rowing and offers the opportunity to fill out a free profile. And for anybody on the junior national team or at any level, you're going to probably fill one of those out in the near future. So take advantage of every opportunity you get. I don't want to limit anybody, but take advantage of every opportunity you get to be seen. Here's a question. You both have coached and recruited D1. What do you see as the differences between a D1 coxswain versus, say, a D3 coxswain? Like, what extra accomplishments can help separate, a coxswain at both levels?
I think the biggest difference in the recruiting process is going to be the academic piece, because as far as I know, Division III schools do not have the ability to bolster applications for recruits, as opposed to maybe many D1s can. If someone's below the general standard for the university, many D1s can help push a recruit over the edge, and D3 does not have that capability. That's the first thing that I would say. Patrick?
Yeah, I think there are some rules in the NCAA world, but I'm not entirely sure. I'm not going to even act like I know what the D3 rules are. But again, I recommend you reach out to those coaches. I think the recruiting process isn't that different overall. I think the outcome, as Brett said, as far as getting admitted is different. But I think the process, most coaches have sort of been, a lot of coaches have been at both levels, the D3 and the D1, especially on the men's side. And so I think you reach out to the coach and you ask them, like, what is the difference? And I think that, a lot of the biggest difference to me about D3 versus D1 is the type of school, the competition, and a few other things. It's really, is that what you want? I think is really a big question. Do you understand the differences in between the two? And is that what you're interested in? So.
All right. A little bit trickier question for you. As a parent, is there anything I can do to help my child row in college? Who wants to go first on that one?
I mean, sure. I think that you can be endlessly supportive, right? I can't stress it enough. I think that support, I think a little bit of pushing can sometimes help. Sometimes there's a little bit of an overshove. I think that I think the challenge for parents is they never know how much to be or not be involved. And I think the best way I try to describe it for parents is that parents ask questions that 18-year-olds wouldn't, and 18-year-olds ask questions that parents wouldn't. So I think it's really challenging when a parent says, go ask the coach this about something that kid really doesn't care where the dining hall is. And he doesn't really care how many meals he's going to get. He assumes you're probably going to take care of it because that's what's happened, mom and dad, for the last 18 years. So, and I think that part is where parents can engage in this process and email coaches their questions. I think that's one way. I think the other way is understanding how hard it is on these athletes to get recruited and to get a spot, and how they're not all going to get one. And as much as you push and push and push, and it's really a tough thing for them to do. And those that get one are really, really fortunate. And I think that just staying, I know parents are supportive, but this idea of, it's hard for an 18-year-old kid to decide that he's going to work out every day on his own for 6 days a week. It's not easy. It's not easy for a 20-year-old. It's not easy for us as we get older. And so I think trying to allow them to have confidence and space to get involved is in that process is great. And then the third point I would make is getting the high school athlete to start emailing coaches will hopefully motivate them a little further, right? I mean, getting that reply to email, understanding more. And I think I had put on one slide is the coaches are ready to talk to the athletes no matter who they are. And they're not. So I think that is the big thing is how do you get this kid to send the email and start the process and take off from there? And that's a tough one.
Mm-hmm.
Tough one. Brett, what were you thinking?
Yeah, no, I agree with all of that. I think one other piece, and I think the first question that parents should ask themselves that I think sometimes we forget to ask their child is, what do they want from their college experience? And do they want to row, number one? And the answer can be, I'm not sure. Like, they don't have to know 100%. Like, there's nothing that says that you have to know 100% when you start this process or in the process that, oh yes, I'm totally gung-ho. I think it's okay to be, not sure and be doing investigation. But I also think it's important to make sure that it's something that they want to do, as opposed to, I think some people get caught up in the rat race of recruiting because a lot of people on their team do it. People that are upperclassmen have done it before them. Some places might have a culture where that's what you do. You just go row in college. And then, I mean, I've definitely experienced it as a coach, and I'm sure you have too, Patrick, where then athletes get to college and they're like, oh, wow, I don't think I want to actually do this. And that's some of the most unfortunate scenarios. So I think number one is having an open dialogue about what the athlete wants. And they might not know, and that's okay, but know that they might not know, and that it could. And that's when you want to sprinkle in, like Patrick, I love that Patrick talked about, have non-rowing schools as the options as you're looking, because that might be the best fit. Or like a club team might be the best fit. We're like, I do love to row, but I want to do it recreationally. I don't want it to be something where I'm spending 20 plus hours a week training.
I think the other thing I think for parents is there's an academic, like for this decision from a parent standpoint, there's an academic piece, there's an athletic piece, and there's a financial piece. And I say this a lot with people I talk to is like, there's all three pieces of this puzzle, and you can set some of those guidelines as a parent, and that will help as well. But I think that, understanding you have the kid that's overeager, so you got to kind of set some of those boundaries from some of them, and you have some of them that sort of are shy about getting involved in the process because they think that they're not good enough. And I think that what's great about the sport of rowing, and it's one of the reasons that all of us on this call and every call is, it's one of the safest sports to be in. It's always positive. It's always uplifting. When you fall, you don't fall far, and there's always somebody to pick you up. So, and I think the community is really, really supportive of one another. And you'll find that in the recruiting process as well.
All right, thank you guys. How do you recommend staying in touch with coaches that may not be recruiting or have already recruited this year? And the second part of that question is, what does partial support look like? And what would it look like in this case? I'm not sure if we know the specifics of the case though.
I think that, if a coach has filled their class, there's not a whole lot you can do. I think that that's just kind of the way it goes. And I think coaches are slowly going through that process. The men's side and the women's side are very different. The men's side is far more wide open at this stage. And the women's side is, most programs have started to fill slots, and they have, a certain number of slots left for the 2021 class. And I think that if it's full, it's hard to do much about it. And, if it is open and there's slots left, I think each program, I have programs that are telling me that they're slowing down, and I have programs that are telling me they're speeding up. So there is no one way for everyone. I think it's just continuing to engage in that process. Mm-hmm. So I think that is, part of it is just trying to understand where they are. As far as the, and then I think you just stay the course. If they're full, they're full. And then as far as was it partial support?
Yes.
I mean, I'm pretty direct about this. I think that recruiting coaches should be more frank and direct about what the support is and what it means. Because I think, ultimately these coaches are trying to build great teams, but coaches have to respect the high school athlete, has to make a decision to make. So I think full support. Do we think that we're meaning athletic aid here or admission? I'm taking it as an admission question. I'll take this as an admission question and go this route. If you have full support, then that probably means that they have the capacity to not get you in. That's not what they're doing. They have an opportunity to recognize your special skill set as a differentiator during the admissions process, which would highly likely get you admitted to that school. And that would be, I mean, yes, you can read between the lines on that. I think partial support is the capacity to either write admissions a letter or suggest that this is someone that they're very, very interested in, but it provides no 100% guarantee there.
And I think that a lot of schools, some schools, at least that I know I've been at, have had tiered support because, and usually certain academics qualify you for one support to demonstrate those special skills. And if I think a lot of these questions I think the simple answer to a lot of these questions is ask the coach directly and ask them, like, what exactly does this mean? And I can't think of a time when I, as a coach, have ever gotten a question for, hey, can I get clarification on how this admissions piece works, or what is a partial scholarship? Like, when you say 30%, it's 30% of what? Always happy to answer those questions. No one's trying to, I think, be vague, purposely vague. So I think directly asking, because it's going to be different by every school. Every school is going to be different.
Yeah, and I think, part of it is it's not just they're being vague, they also kind of assume you would know, right? If I tell you I'm giving you partial support, maybe you should know what that is, as opposed to me saying, oh, you don't know, let me really walk you through this process. So that's where asking that question. They may think you know, because maybe you're at a program that sends kids every year, right? Maybe who knows? So a lot of times the recruiters forget. Anyway, sir, go ahead. What else we got?
All right. And that might be the same answer for this. How do you approach a coach about an official, especially when everything is so unsure?
Go ahead, Brett.
I think that people often shy away from us, and maybe it's because they, especially right now is the time to make the call. Patrick highlighted it multiple times. Like, I have never had such an easy time to get a hold of the college coaching community. And I recruit for the U23 team. So a lot of times once I hit end of February, early March, it's really hard to get those coaches on the phone, because as they're training, they're getting ready for races every weekend. Like, they are so busy and they are so focused on the athletes that are in their boathouse right at that moment. And it's harder for them to think about athletes that are trying to come in, as well as, what their athletes are going to do post grad. They're 100% focused on what's in front of them. They're available now. They're dying for community and contact, just like everybody. So I think, now is the time to ask that question, and it can be broached over email for sure. Like, what would it take? Like, what would it take for me to get an official? And if not, can I do an unofficial? I think, ask them directly.
I think that you need to have a relationship. I think you need to have established contact.
Yep.
I've done a few emails. I think if you're in your very first email asking how to get an official visit, that is probably not going to get a reply, right? I think it's after you've established that this is a program you really want to go to, they know who you are, and then I think you can ask that question. So I would say, have 2 or 3 emails, phone calls, get a feel for, hey, are they interested in the athlete? Is the athlete interested in the school? Okay, are we going to bring you to campus? And the reason that the official visits are not just given out so I can have, for those of you, is that it costs the programs money. It's a ton of logistics from a compliance standpoint for these coaches, with the NC2A having to do paperwork on the front end, paperwork on the back end. It's a strain on your current student collegiate athletes because of hosting duties, time they have to give up, new NC2A rules about when that time takes place and days off and everything else. So part of the official visit process and why they're limited is really the effect it has on their staff and their team. It really does have a big impact. So, ask the question after you have the relationship, but also understand why they are sometimes hesitant, because all of a sudden that's one more athlete. That's a lot more. And I'm not saying the athlete isn't worth it. The athlete is, but they may not just be ready to pull the trigger. They may want to see some more progress.
All right, thanks. As a junior girl right now, if you have an offer, should you let other schools know about this, and which school has offered you the spot?
It's all you, Brett.
I'm all for transparency, and there might be other people that would advise differently, but I'm all for transparency. And I'm reading the question here. It says, other schools that you're heavily interested in. Yes, if you're heavily interested in other, you have one from, say, like maybe your third or fourth choice, I would definitely let choices 1 through 3 know, and especially if there's a timeline on the offer. I would just I'm always pushing for transparency, and as a recruiter, that's always what I try to do.
I think male, female.
Is this different?
No, I think you have to be careful. Are you trying to leverage something, or are you trying to say, I understand where it's challenging on the families, because the families may like another school more than the existing offer, and they may want to get some clarity. I think you have to be careful not to let it come across as leverage, whether it be negotiating admissions or scholarship or any level of aid. And I think you have to, again, it's part of the process, right? And that's a tricky one. I do think transparency always wins, but I understand where the families are coming from, and that you need to just have these conversations and get out there and try to figure out what it is. Just tread delicately that it doesn't come across as I'm going to leverage this to leverage up.
Yeah, really good point.
And that goes back to creating that relationship, right? Taking the time to create the relationship so that when you're speaking to the coach, they know that you're being genuine and that you're not trying to leverage. It's just a point of information, and it's a factor in your decision. As a coach at high school, we always told the parents not to play games. We always told them, the parents and the kid, we wouldn't lie for you, because it's not just you in the college, it's our program for the next 10 years in that college. And if you were going to oversell it or be shady like that, that's going to reflect on your program. It just is. It's just human nature. If you burn somebody, your future, the teammates that you're leaving behind are going to pay for that too in the future. So to always be just upfront, be genuine, and not have any kind of leverage, things like leverage being present. Is it important to fill out the Google Forms on each school's rowing website? Typically these include ERG scores, age, SAT, ACT, and so on.
I will answer a different question. I will say that in the recruiting process, recruiting databases are really important to college coaches because of compliance. It is often college's first step to being able to even email you. Some schools cannot even email you until you filled out one of their recruiting questionnaires. So I'm not necessarily addressing that specific question or Google Forms, but I can tell you the process for collegiate coaches is that you have to fill out a questionnaire from a compliance standpoint, because some schools have to record every email or phone call. You have to have established them in a database in order to make sure that they're following the rules. So yes, please fill out the questionnaire for these coaches. It saves them an email. I think the other thing is you should put in as much information as you have, because ultimately, as a recruiting coordinator or a coach, it doesn't matter. As a collegiate coach in the process of recruiting, if there is no ERG score, we either assume it's not great or you haven't done it. And neither of those. So it's like, it's better to be open, and this is where you are, and start talking about your journey than it is to try and hide, because it's going to come out sooner or later.
My favorite was when I would get an email, because all coaches that have their questionnaire, and they get the questionnaire emailed to them the second someone fills out. My favorite was always questionnaire would come into the inbox, then a follow-up email. Hi, coach. Like, I just filled out the questionnaire. Here's especially if there's something that maybe the questionnaire didn't ask that you think is important to your story, and to start introducing and building that relationship. I loved that when it was questionnaire, follow-up email with more info. Like, bam, bam, already I like this kid.
And ask about the school. I can't stress it enough.
Yes. And already know about the school. Do research beforehand. No, look, because I think that's as a recruiter, when, tell me what you know about XYZ University. No, I don't really know much. Know something.
Is there any advice you'd give an international applicant who might not have easy access to U.S. standards and have difficulty visiting the schools?
how are you interpreting that easy access? What does that mean, Brett?
Yeah. I mean, everyone, maybe not right now in the current, I don't know if is this a specific COVID-19 question? Because, if you have an athlete, because normally, a 2K is standard across the world. Because I think that's a big piece in international recruiting is the scores, because it's one of the few things you can compare. It's harder to compare some of the racing that happens. Also, just different countries develop their athletes different. Like I think in the U.S. we're maybe a little bit more obsessed than some of the others. So I know race results, like I've always looked at for internationals, especially if they're in small boats, because a lot of times international recruits row in singles and pairs and doubles more often. So yeah, I'm not entirely sure if that's a specific COVID question or just an in general question.
I think as far as visiting campuses, I think, our high school students across the country that have the opportunity to go on visual visits are so overwhelmingly lucky, right?
Yeah.
When you are not an athlete and you get to walk a campus, you have a tour guide and you get to walk in a building, but you don't really get to see all these things. So I think that you can build enough of a relationship. And there are rules out there that state that the coach cannot connect a current athlete with a high school athlete. There is no rule about you becoming friends with anybody on Facebook or Instagram that's currently at the program and asking them questions about that program. So if you are in that process as any recruit, maybe you reach out to somebody in the program and ask them some questions about, some things that the coach may not know, or you're just kind of curious about from a sort of young adult standpoint. So I think that you can make a really great informed decision about where you're going to go. If you do the right research and you build the right relationships, and this is true, honestly, I will expand this question and just already jump to, let's say worst case scenario, nobody's in school in the fall. I think that a lot of athletes are going to have to make decisions, and you're going to want to spend the time building those relationships now. If there is no classes in session and they're all online in the fall, you have to build the relationships now, try to learn as much about that program as you want. Talking to multiple recruiting coaches, asking them, please don't ask the generic question, what is your culture? But please ask questions about culture and what does it look like, and what do they do for fun, and what are the team building activities, and what does the team like to do the most together, and try to find pathways to get the information you're looking. So I don't know that that's a domestic versus international thing, especially with the current climate. I would just think that you really can come up with a lot of information if you engage in the process and talk to the coaches.
Great. That was really good. Does it have an impact, and in this case, she's a coxswain, to go to big events such as the Canadian Henley, even if placement was not going to be great or is not great? Would it still be a good thing to put on your coxswain resume to say that you were there?
Go ahead, Brett.
Yeah, I'd say yes, 100%. And I think that, and this is related to another question I'd say actually that I saw on here about how closely do recruiters look at race results compared to say the on land data that people look at. And I think it's a little bit different for coxswains, like experienced, especially when you're talking about something like Canadian Henley, where I think they have 8 lanes there. I mean, it's a big event. It's a big regatta. I think knowing that coxswains can handle themselves in those environments is definitely important. As far as, and I'm going to speak, this might be very specific to me. So Patrick, please, especially from the men's team perspective, which isn't a perspective I have, please answer this. In terms of race results, I think it very much, it depends on the race, and it depends a lot on the boat class. And more so, and it also depends on, the program in a lot of ways. So if, I would never not recruit an athlete, especially if they have very, very good stats, who was a part of an 8 that didn't have great results. Because I think we all know that there are lots of factors that go into making a big boat. And there could very well be an amazing athlete that maybe they're just better than all their teammates, or maybe for whatever reason, they're better than what their boat is showing, which is different than say a single. Whereas, someone that wins the youth invitational, the U.S. Rowing Youth Invitational in the single, you feel pretty good about their boat moving skills. Whereas an 8, similarly, you have someone who's in an 8 that's doing great, that definitely doesn't reflect negatively on you. It reflects positively, but how much, it's hard to know like how big of a piece of that is one person out of 9, including the coxswain. So I think race results matter. I don't think they make or break you either way, with the exception of like again, someone who does really well in a single. I think it's hard to deny that person that might very much trump a not very good erg score. Like that would definitely, like I would definitely look seriously at an athlete that was moving a small boat really, really well, even if their 2K wasn't very good.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first part was really important. Is this idea of, you know, for summer regattas, again, it's about developing as an athlete, right? It's not simply, it's not. I don't think that college coaches say, okay, they went to this program, so it means this. I don't think they say that, but did you go somewhere that developed your skills? And again, every one of these things is a part of your overall profile. So if you go to Canadian Henley, yeah, it gives you an opportunity. Maybe you row, you know, some programs still row 1500s in the spring, and maybe that's the only time you ever got to race a 2,000-meter race, right? Or maybe you didn't get to race on buoyed courses until the very end of the year, and now you get more time on a buoyed course. So I think there's things there that are really helpful about going to those races, but understand, I don't believe a coach is going to say this kid didn't go to Canadian Henley and this kid did. It's just a matter of, okay, we like this kid because they got this extra, but there is not, as I'm learning about decision matrix, they don't have decision matrix for every athlete that is weighted, and they say, okay, Canadian Henley's worth 0.1. I'm not, you know, so that's not how it works. I think there's value there because you get more experience that you could bring to the college. Do I think that you need to spend $6,000 for that experience because it's going to get you in the school you want? No, I don't. You've muted yourself, my friend.
I'm sorry, I'm muted. We're not going to go past 8:30, guys. Just to let you all know, we're going to let these guys get on with their lives. We'll ask a couple more questions, and then I just want to point out a couple things, where you'll find these webinars and so on, and how you can get more questions answered in the future. Let's see. Brett, did you see any of these questions that stood out to you?
I mean, there are some great questions on here. I think there are quite a few questions about coxswains, and I think that we should maybe skip those because we have those coxswain webinars coming up.
Yeah, we have 5 coming up. So
yeah, we have 5 coming up. So I apologize to all the coxswains that are still on the call, but I think those are ones we can hold off.
Quick question: should the class of 2022 be reaching out to coaches now?
Class of 2022 cannot start reaching out for female athletes until June 15th after their sophomore year. And for male athletes, I don't remember the date, but it's the 1st of August or September. I wish someone would chime in and tell me. It's either August or September before your junior year. It's very interesting how that language goes in the 2 sports. So 2022 is you get to breathe easy for the next 3 months.
Yep. Just get fitter.
Yeah.
Go running.
All right. I think we answered the one about how aggressively do recruiters watch results.
Yep.
How helpful are indoor competitions with respect to exposure for high school athletes? I can start off on this. As a coach of the junior team, we collect all of them, and we have an Excel sheet of all the indoor meets, and we put all the athletes on it, and that's how we track and send out invites to different levels of the junior team, from ODP all the way up to selection. So, and for those of you asking about the virtual races, we've already found some athletes that we didn't know about that were very surprising and have worked really hard this winter. And now with that rower's choice race that's going on, seeing some of those kids are pulling monsters, and they flew under the radar until now, and here they are. So, you know, I can only say from my point of view, we found a lot of people we didn't know existed because of those virtual or indoor meets. And so it's helped us, us being the guys team. I can't speak for the girls team or for colleges, but you know, it's been very helpful. You guys?
I definitely always look at those when I was coaching college. I would definitely, and I still look at them as a U23 coach. But yeah, definitely when I was a college recruiter, you're always looking for who's, especially like you love to find someone who's not already on your list, who maybe it's someone that's newer to the sport, someone that maybe not everyone else knows about. You're always looking for those. So, and I think it depends on where you are in your process, because I think some athletes are in the fortunate position where coaches are maybe because they've done the U19 team, or maybe because for whatever reason, like their name's already out there, whether they fill out a be recruited profile and coaches are coming after you and you're trying to beat them away with a stick. Like that's a very wonderful, can be stressful position to be in. If you're someone who's in a position of you're trying to get noticed, yes, that's a great way. Mm-hmm.
I'm going to go a different route.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to go the route of, doing those tests allows you to get better and better, in the sense of you have to walk through the preparation of how to take that test, how to be in that environment, sitting next to somebody else having to do an erg test. And that's really the invaluable piece to me, is from a recruitment standpoint. Yes, it can help for all the national team, junior national team, and junior Bs and all this stuff. And it can help your recruitment. Yes. It also can just help you on the test you have in 2 weeks or 4 weeks or 6 weeks down the road, or even the one you have a year from now. You will have been through this experience and continue to learn from these race experiences and really get a lot out of it. So I think that's the value to me. I think that just chalking it up to one thing, I think as an athlete that's trying to develop skills, I think it teaches you how to prepare for a race and a test without maybe 8 other people if you're in an 8 and or a 4. And I think there's some real value there.
Okay, why don't we just take one more question and then we'll wrap it up. What's your advice for a freshman wanting to get recruited in the future? I'll start, since I was a high school freshman coach for years. My advice is have a lot of fun. Find out if you have the passion for the sport. It's really hard. I'd say set your standards high. Get great habits, right? Learn about nutrition, learn about rest, learn about work ethic, and make sure that you really love it. I mean, to be thinking about being recruited now too much, you're missing out on all the little things along the way that make it so worthwhile to do, as a sport. Like, enjoy rowing, love it. And then later on, a couple of years, you can start really looking at the other aspects. But for now, love the sport, man. Have fun with it. Anything you want to add to the 9th graders? All right.
I'll say, I mean, wherever this is coming from, you've already shown you have a great interest, right? So I think, let that passion continue to fuel you, and you're going to do just fine.
Yeah, here you are sitting on a webinar with old people. So you've already got a thumbs up. Well, thanks for everybody for joining us. One of the things I want to point out is that on usrowing.org, you will find the education page, and on that is the webinar page. All of these have been videotaped, and we will have copies of them up on our YouTube channel and archived, so you can